Good morning, this is Allohmon, and let's talk about army composition in EU4. So the army composition that I usually use, that works especially well in the mid-game, is based on a 2-1-2 ratio. And I like this because when you combine stacks, everything stays a power of 2. So 32 is a power of 2, 16 is a power of 2, 8 is a power of 2, 4 and 2 are all powers of 2. And so it's very easy to split armies into identical stacks. You never have to worry about having, odd numbers and weird, like one stack gets this many and the other stack gets that many of a certain unit. You don't have to worry about any of that. Everything stays the same and standardized, and that's just very appealing to me. And so depending on the school of thought that you subscribe to when it comes to cavalry, the sweet spot people say is usually either, well, some just say don't use cavalry. Some might say 8. I think 6 is about the ideal number. And so looking at these stacks, the heavy siege stack and the light siege stack, the 40 stacks and 20 stacks, are just about the sweet spot. One is a little high over 6, one is a little low below 6, but they're the closest ones to that number. The problem is that when you combine 2 heavy siege stacks into 1 death stack, you have 16 cavalry, and this is bad for all sorts of reasons. That number is just far too high for them to be effective in combat. That's almost 3 times what I consider to be the optimal number. And you just basically have a lot of dead weight in your army. The cavalry often aren't fighting at all because the front line is not wide enough. You have to pay them a lot more than you pay your infantry. And in a bad situation, you can actually get the insufficient support penalty because you have all of these cavalry who aren't even fighting or taking losses, and if your infantry have a particularly bad fight, you could wind up with, for example, 12,000 infantry and 14,000 cavalry or something like that. So that's really not good. So here's my revision. Basically, just start at the top of the line. So, this old style was built from the bottom up, starting with that carpet stack of 2, 1, 2, and then just combining those to get each successive level of the army. In the revision, we go from the top down. So we subtract 8 from the cavalry in the death stack, and we add that number straight back to the infantry. And then that kind of trickles down to the other stacks. The problem with this is that the carpet stack is no longer viable because you never know if you're going to have 3 infantry, 0 cavalry, 2 artillery, or 2 infantry, 1 cavalry, 2 artillery. And I don't like having unpredictability in the army formations. So let's just strike the carpet stack now. So here's the new army composition. It still follows that same pattern, 80, 40, 20, and 10 stack sizes. But now it's more heavily focused on infantry, less heavily focused on cavalry, and the sweet spot is now shifted up. Now the death stack of 80 is probably the optimal fighting army, but the 40 is still quite good. So some of the pros here, it's just a much better combat composition, especially for later game when you have these larger armies. If we're having 80 stacks marching all over the place, fighting lots of battles, we don't want to have lots of cavalry just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, doing nothing, and just costing lots of money. Also, they're much cheaper. Infantry are just a lot cheaper than cavalry. Of course, artillery are much more expensive than both, but it saves money. And it's still built using powers of 2 for easy splitting. Now, of course, 5, 10, 20, and 40 are not powers of 2 themselves, but they are still built out of powers of 2. So the infantry, remember, that was 32 plus 8. Those are both still powers of 2. So it still allows for that nice, easy, equal splitting. As far as cons go, there's really only one, and it's not something unique to this composition. The old one had this problem too. The heavy siege stack is weak against high-level forts. Just 16 artillery is not really enough to get the job done for very large forts. And so one idea would be to, in addition to having all of these armies with this composition, so keep in mind, again, the stack sizes are 80, 40, 20, and 10. So one idea would be to have a few 16 stacks that would be immediately recognizable for having 16 as their number, that would be purely artillery, that could move with and sit on top of heavy siege stacks for bigger sieges. And what this looks like is, first of all, the unmodified heavy siege stack gets the siege modifiers of +5, +4, +2, and +2 for the fort levels in the game. The levels 2, 4, 6, and 8. If you add 16 artillery, it changes the picture a bit. So now we get +5, +5, +5, and +4, which looks pretty darn good at first glance, but that +16 is really overkill for forts level 2 and 4. It is not any help at all there. It does quite dramatically improve rolls against fort level 6, and it does so reliably. You keep that bonus quite solidly. But 16 only moderately improves rolls against fort level 8, and that's also vulnerable to disease outbreak. So if you get a disease outbreak, or you just don't have a full 32 stack of artillery, that modifier goes down to a +3. So then it's kind of like, why are you spending this obscenely huge amount of money for all of these extra 16 stacks of artillery if you're only going to get a +1 to the siege modifier? It's just, it only buys you maybe a month in the siege time. So yeah, my assessment is this is probably too complicated to be worthwhile. It's probably best to just kind of suck it up and say, okay, sieges might be a little slow, but it'll still get the job done over time. So again, here is the new army composition, and I think this is, well, I'm going to try this out, but I think this is going to be kind of my new standard thing later game. Basically cut out a lot of the cavalry, build up a lot more infantry, and just fill in my armies from there as I progress into the later game when fire gets more and more and more important, cavalry are de-emphasized. So let me know your thoughts. I'm always interested in talking about army composition. That's been one of my favorite subjects in this game. So, let me know what your pet favorites are, and if my composition is very different from yours, I'd be interested to hear how you do your armies. Alright, good night, sleep tight, and gosh, I don't know what to say here. Don't let the new army bite? What? I've really got to plan these things out in advance if I'm going to have a variable closing. Alright, bye-bye.